Well, we'd like to thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of Governing Georgia on WTOC Plus, where every Friday we take you under the Gold Dome to break down the major bills moving through the State House and explain what they mean for you, your family, and your community. I'm digital anchor Jude Binkley. Thanks for joining us this Friday. We begin with this. Your teen's cell phone could soon be off limits at school as Georgia lawmakers are pushing a bill that could ban cell phones in high schools, a change that could redefine the modern classroom. Now, this follows last year's legislation banning phones for students in kindergarten through 8th grade, a policy set to take effect this summer. Now, House Bill 1009 is advancing after clearing a subcommittee, paving the way for expanded cell phone restrictions in Georgia high schools starting in the 2027-2028 school year. Sponsored by Representative Scott Hilton, the bill calls for a bell-to-bell ban, keeping phones off limits from the first bell to dismissal, with exemptions for students in dual enrollment and approved work-based learning programs.
The issue is we want teachers to teach and students to learn, and our teachers not to be a cell phone police. If we have a policy that says instruction time, you're having to deal with the in and out, the constant in and out of the cell phone, or if it's black and white, very simple, beginning of the day, end of the day, kids get that. Teachers get that.
The bill is still under review, and lawmakers say changes are possible before a final version is approved. Well, state lawmakers are also moving forward with a plan to help keep kids safe in classrooms. Legislation's been created to install weapons detection systems in all public schools across Georgia. That advanced under the Gold Dome earlier this week. Alani Litang with our sister station has the details.
Having as many layers of protection for our students and our teachers, that's the most important thing.
Georgia public schools are one step closer to safer entrances. House Bill 1023 requiring all Georgia public schools to install weapon detection systems passed the House Education Committee Thursday.
I think it's kind of ridiculous that, this hasn't been implemented.
Layla Renee Contreras, an Appalachian High School alumna with Change for Chi, has been on the forefront of increased school safety since the deadly attack at Appalachian High School in 2024.
Anything we can do to deter these people from bringing harm to our children. This is one step closer to bringing them safety.
Barrow County Schools installed weapons detectors at all middle and high schools in January 2025, along with equipping all schools with school resource officers. Appalachia shooting survivor Kira McConatha says not the shooting, but another student bringing a gun on campus after is when the detectors came into play.
It's very needed. It feels like a burden is lifted off your shoulders after you have safety measures.
If you're here to support House Bill 223, please stand so the committee can see you.
The bill, sponsored by House Majority Leader Republican Representative Chuck Evstration, says the detection system is part of his everyday when he reports to the Capitol.
I believe that this is a reasonable measure under the circumstances of wanting to ensure every Georgia parent knows when they drop their children off at school, they're going to be able to pick them up safely at the end of the day.
Some concerns in the committee being raised by Democratic Representative Karen Lupton.
I have a concern that what sort of liability does this put our school systems in if we say you have to have every entrance covered?
I don't see that this in any way changes liability. It's just my opinion. That issue hasn't been raised with me since I've introduced this bill.
And staying in education news this afternoon, Georgia lawmakers are working to tackle literacy rates in schools. The Speaker of the House says it's his #1 priority this legislative session. The Speaker said yesterday that 1 in 3 Georgia kids cannot read proficiently by the 3rd grade. A proposed bill would require children to attend kindergarten before enrolling in 1st grade. Additionally, it would allow schools to hold back students in kindergarten through 1st grade if they're not reading proficiently. The bill also provides funding for literacy coaches in every elementary school in the state. Speaker John Burns said it's about time that the state tackle this problem, and many Democrats agree.
We are not in the state we're in because of our teachers. They are doing an incredible job. but they need additional resources.
Many teachers come in and they're new. They need to learn the techniques that, folks that have more experience are able to practice in their classrooms.
Individual school systems will also have to come up with their own literacy plans that are subject to review every 4 years. Well, Georgia's General Assembly heard directly from leaders across Savannah and Chatham County this week as part of Savannah-Chatham County Day at the Capitol. We're joined now with Cam McCann, who spent part of the week under the Gold Dome. Cam, first off, tell us a little bit about what Savannah-Chatham County Day was like and kind of why they do it.
Well, I spoke with Mayor Van Johnson, from Savannah, and he told me that essentially this is Savannah and Chatham coming to Atlanta and letting everybody there know what they're about, right? And so they're bringing forward issues like, their tourism and marketing, industry, things like, the $50 million homelessness response grant that Brian Kemp put out. They want a part in that. And so they're explaining why they deserve these things, why they need to be in on these fundings. You can see Van Johnson giving an address right there. They had multiple different things on their agenda that day. And it all culminated with this pretty crazy oyster roast that happened right at the end of the day. There was about 750 people in this it was a depot, and it was a crazy time, but just in the sense of you have all these Savannah Chatham leaders, and then you have all these people who are making state legislators or making state legislation. And so it's just an intersection of rubbing shoulders, lobbying, saying, hey, we think we deserve this, hey, and bringing Savannah's and Chatham's needs to the state level.
750 people is quite the contingency. And Cam, I think you touched on it just a moment ago, but what are some of the issues top of mind that our leaders locally want to make sure that the state legislature is addressing?
Yeah, Jude, you think of the biggest thing to come to the state of Georgia this year and really the world. What's the biggest sporting event? It's going to be the World Cup. That's coming to Atlanta this summer. And, it's different than a Super Bowl, which we're going to see here pretty soon, where the Super Bowl is a one-day event. The World Cup is an entire country basically playing and advancing. And so you're going to see people coming in and staying for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They want to capitalize on all those international tourists that are coming to Atlanta, to Georgia, and having them come around to Savannah. And so I talked with the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce who put this whole thing together, the Savannah Area Chamber of Commerce. And he was just telling me, look, we want to capitalize on that. And so that's the big thing that they're lobbying for this year that needs to happen. But there's just other things like the homelessness response grant that I mentioned earlier, $50 million in the budget getting put towards that. I remember, a couple of people saying this is the largest sum of, funds that are getting put into, a homelessness response grant from at least Brian Kemp in Georgia. So that's a big thing, right? You're thinking of people on the streets here. How can we better serve them? How can we better help them? And there were just other things like CAT, Chatham Area Transit, looking to kind of clear things up with the county, looking to clear its board up. The Georgia General Assembly had changed its structure earlier last year. And so just kind of lobbying again about what they need. They want more westward expansion. Tybee, we're looking at that coastline, potential erosion. These are all of the issues that each individual organization has, and they're taking it as a collective voice, right? So, you see there's a ton of different leaders just in these videos alone, and that doesn't even capitalize. You see the Tybee mayor right there. It's all these different people coming from different areas in Chatham County with their own individual agendas, and I laid a couple out there, but 750 people, there are 750 agendas that were at the state capitol that were around the Savannah-Chatham area on Wednesday.
Yeah, tourism, a major economy driver here locally for, essentially the entire county. One of the biggest industries here. I know Atlanta's hosting, I believe, 8 World Cup games. Funny enough, we were looking at tickets yesterday. A little too steep for my wallet, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of folks here locally that go check it out in Atlanta.
And just 8 confirmed games, too. That's something to keep an eye on. There are potential 4 more games, I believe. But I just know it's 8 confirmed games, and then it's like TBD.
Yeah. And speaking of sports, another issue you talked about was sports gambling and kind of the recent introduction of something called predictions markets, which has kind of recently launched in Georgia. There's a couple companies do it. First off, Cam, could you kind of break down what predictions markets are? Because it's kind of a confusing concept.
Yeah, so sports gambling, everybody kind of has an idea on that by now. If you don't, you're a little bit behind the eight ball. But essentially, that's just picking a player or a team to do a specific thing, right? Whether it's a player scoring a touchdown, you can bet on that. Whether it's a team winning this game, whether it's a team winning this game by how much, that's sports gambling, right? Well, with these prediction markets, they want to take to the next step. I believe it's Kalshi's statement, their mission statement, where it's you can bet on anything, anywhere, at any time. And that in and of itself is a very dangerous statement when you're talking about gambling. You know, there are already some issues with sports gambling, you know, when you look at players who are betting on themselves. Well, what if you're talking about, you know, a Secretary of State giving a press conference, and then there's a bet to see how long it goes, right? If I'm the Secretary of State and I'm seeing that, I'm going, well, not that I would, but I could hypothetically put $500,000 to go under and then just miss it by 30 seconds, right? And so we're seeing things like that pop up lately where it's like, these are conflict of interest bets. And it's just, if it gets to a major state, which it's not at yet, it's still in the very early development growing phases. It kind of became a thing in 2024. But as we see it grow, the dangers of this potential market where, you can really just bet on anything, including if you're a high-ranking state official or a person of interest, you can bet on yourselves. And that's kind of the intersection and the dangers that I'm at least looking into, speaking about. And I've spoken with Moms Against Gambling earlier today. I spoke with legislators when I was at Georgia, talking about their governing of Georgia. They were talking about, well, sports gambling, you bring in revenue, you bring in all these sorts of things, and it really helps out the economy. When you're talking about prediction markets that are unregulated at the moment, they're not making revenue off that. They're not making money off that. And so it's a real problem that the state has yet to address, like, publicly, at least in my, scope, what I've heard and seen and looked into. But that's essentially a long-winded version of what these prediction markets are. Sorry, I rambled a bit there. Essentially gambling anywhere, anytime.
Basically, it certainly falls under a sports gambling umbrella, or it can, even though predictions markets can be outside of gambling as well. You look at cryptocurrency, you look at stock markets. But regardless, you spoke with organizations and lawmakers about their reactions, potential proposals under the state capitol. So let's go ahead and take a look at that story right now.
Prize Picks has their corporate headquarters here in Georgia. I don't get that when, gambling is illegal.
Jeannie Seaver founded the organization Moms Against Gambling and believes legalizing sports gambling creates problems. According to the National Library of Medicine, studies show that 1 in 5 people with a gambling disorder have attempted suicide and has the highest suicide rate across all addictions.
It's something that people really need to be aware of, and a lot of people aren't.
Democratic State Senator Derek Mallow has experienced gambling with his brother in Illinois. He talked to me on Wednesday at the state capitol building about the economic benefits of sports gambling in Georgia.
It's currently unregulated, and people are doing it. And guess what? We're missing out on tax revenue in this state where we can use it to fund education, we can fund addiction programs.
In speaking with him and several other lawmakers, they were unaware of the new trend to gambling, prediction markets.
This is Mallow's live reaction to Kalshi's interface, which he'd never seen before. And this was his response when I asked him about his thoughts.
We don't want to take away anybody's rights or freedoms, but we do want to have guardrails to ensure that they do have protections.
These prediction markets far exceed just gambling on sports with the ability to gamble on political or real-world events. According to Seaver, that creates entirely new problems.
What really comes to your mind when you hear something like that?
Corruption.
Well, a tax fight is erupting at the Georgia State Capitol with billions of dollars and your property tax bill hanging in the balance. This week, the Georgia Senate passed its version of a property tax relief bill, setting up a high-stakes showdown with the Georgia House of Representatives. Our State House reporter Abby Kasoris has the details.
Tension from the start. Senators took up a bill that hits homeowners.
Immediately transmitted to the House. Is there...
Before debate began, 2 Democrats tried to block it. Their effort failed, clearing the way for a vote.
I think all my colleagues in here know how much I hate coming to the well.
Supporters spoke first, including Senator Frank Ginn, who shared a story from a constituent struggling with rising property taxes.
Use the last bit of savings we have to pay my property taxes, which will save me from losing my home, or keep the last bit of savings we have left held back to pay for funeral expenses for my daughter. This is an impossible choice we have to make.
Opposition followed quickly. Senator Nan Orrock warned cutting property taxes could hit schools, which rely on that money.
How much do we want to hobble public education?
All those in favor of the bill will vote yea, opposed nay.
In the end, the Senate passed the bill, capping how fast property tax bills can grow by limiting how quickly home values are assessed. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones happy to have passed this legislation. He calls it a priority bill.
The buzzword has been cost of living and affordability. Well, that's something we've been working on in my 3 years as Lieutenant Governor.
Jones says seniors and families on fixed incomes can't absorb big jumps in tax bills, which is why the Senate focused on caps.
Let's get started on the right foot, right?
While the Speaker of the House across the hall wants to go further with a plan to phase out property taxes on primary homes by 2032. The proposal would exempt more of a home's value from taxes each year, up to $60,000 or more.
House Republicans believe no one should ever face the loss of their home because they can't afford to pay rent to the government.
But local governments and school districts warn that plan could leave an estimated $5 billion gap statewide, raising questions about schools, services, and who picks up the tab.
At the state capitol, I'm Abby Kasouris.
Well, here's another bill we've been tracking this week. 5 Georgia lawmakers are pushing to make human trafficking eligible for the death penalty. House Bill 1154 seeks to add these crimes to the list of offenses punishable by death. Currently, Georgia's death penalty is reserved for crimes including murder, rape, and treason. Right now, there are only 3 states in the U.S. where the death penalty applies to trafficking. Those states are Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi. In other news, a billionaire is officially jumping into Georgia's governor race. Healthcare executive Rick Jackson is launching his campaign with $50 million and ads that are already airing statewide. At his company headquarters just a few days ago, he called Georgia's political establishment a, quote, cartel, adding it's run by politicians who answer to lobbyists. Jackson is joining a crowded field of 13 so far. There are 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans. Current Governor Brian Kemp is at the end of his term limit, and Election Day is November 3rd. A bill advancing at the Georgia Capitol could change high school sports across the state. It would allow student athletes to make money off their name, image, and likeness, commonly referred to as NIL deals. Republican sponsor Representative Brent Cox says the bill would let athletes take endorsement deals while making sure contracts do not lock them in long term. He calls it putting guardrails around a system that already exists. However, critics warn it could open the door to pressure and exploitation.
The gist of this bill is to make sure when a student athlete moves to the next level of college that current structured contract they have is null and void, and they can now move forward into a renegotiated contract.
Any time we introduce money at magnitudes and scales that these kids and their families have yet to even think about, it could lead to some unintended consequences.
According to the Georgia High School Association, only 57 athletes statewide currently have NIL deals. Most of those are for free gear or small endorsements, not big paydays. Finally, here on Governing Georgia, when you go out to eat across the state, you could get more information about where your food is coming from. This week, the Georgia Senate voted to require restaurants to disclose whether their shrimp is imported or farmed in the United States. The bill's aimed at giving consumers transparency, all the while supporting our local shrimping industry. This shrimp transparency bill passed the Georgia Senate this week 43-8. Imported shrimp are typically cheaper than wild-caught U.S. shrimp, but have overwhelmed the market. Shrimp harvested in the U.S. face some of the strictest safety, labor, and environmental standards. 4 southern states already have transparency laws. South Carolina and Florida are also looking at their options for similar legislation.
We're not trying to, there's no way to stop the imports. It's going to happen. They've taken the market over. They do over 95% of what the nation consumes is farm raised and imported. And So, you know, we keep telling ourselves, well, we only have to hit 5% of the people that it's willing to look for and ask for, you know, domestic wild caught shrimp, and that's the biggest issue is getting that 5%.
Now, the bill mandates that restaurants serving imported shrimp must display on their menu a disclosure by each menu item with shrimp saying foreign imported if it is. And that's now the second food-related bill we've covered this session. The other one, a little bit more lighthearted, a proposal to make lemon pepper wings the official chicken wing flavor of the state of Georgia. I believe we talked about that maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago here on Governing Georgia. All right, and with that, we are going to wrap things up here for this week's episode of Governing Georgia. You can join us right here every Friday on WTOC Plus and the WTOC Facebook page. You can leave comments, and I'll try to answer them as well after the show. But each week for Governing Georgia, throughout the session, we're breaking down major bills we're learning about each week and explaining what they mean for you, your family, and your community. We'll be back next Friday at 2:30, and we'd like to thank you all for watching.